coating catfish in yellow mustard before the cornmeal dredge, laying white bread flat under the fish to catch the grease, reading the oil by sound alone. None of it was ever written down. Those hands are gone. Here are 30 African American fish fry dishes that disappeared after the 1980s. Fried porgy came to the table whole, head on, tail on, skin blistered and crackling from the cast iron, and you ate it with 2 slices of white bread pressed flat on either side, soaking up every drop of grease. In mid-Atlantic, black communities from the Chesapeake corridor up through Philadelphia and New York, porgy was the fish of Friday. You seasoned it with salt and cayenne, rolled it in cornmeal, and dropped it into oil that had been heating since early afternoon. You tested the heat with a drop of water and listened for that first hard hiss. Porgy is a broad-finned fish with more bones than most people today are willing to navigate, and that's exactly why it left modern kitchens. Younger cooks never learned how to eat around them, how to hold the fish by the tail and work the flesh away from the spine with your lips and tongue. That skill was passed at the table, not from a book. When the elders stopped frying porgy, the knowledge of how to eat it went silent with them. You knew who made the best sandwich by where you stood in line. Everybody angled toward the same woman, the one who pressed the bread hard on both sides, kept a bottle of thin vinegar hot sauce in her apron pocket, and fried the whiting in small batches so nothing got soggy. The fried fish sandwich was the working currency of black community life from the 1940s through the 70s, whiting or catfish between 2 slices of white bread wrapped in wax paper handed across a folding table. Fried fish sandwiches were the cash cow of church fundraisers in that era, easy to sell at a profit for building funds or as a respectable alternative to the rent party. You could eat one standing up, leaning against a car, no silverware, no plate, no formality. That particular version, bone and whiting, thin hot sauce, soft white bread, stopped showing up at the gatherings sometime after the 1980s. Sunday mornings had their own smell, and in households that kept the tradition, that smell was salmon croquettes, the quiet sizzle of a shallow skillet, patties of canned pink salmon mixed with egg, onion, and crushed crackers, fried on both sides until golden and firm. Canned salmon was an affordable pantry staple in black households from the 1940s onward, cheap enough to stretch a breakfast for 6 and rich enough to carry people through a long morning of church. Your grandmother didn't measure anything. She cracked the egg directly over the bowl, shook in the crackers by feel, added black pepper and sometimes mustard, and shaped the patties with wet palms. If they fell, apart in the pan, she told you your hands were too hot. The grits went on first, always simmering low while the croquettes fried. By the time the patties were done, the kitchen was full of steam and your plate was already half warm. Salmon croquettes with grits was the Sunday companion to the Saturday fish fry, a quieter discipline that required the same hands and the same knowledge. The women who got them right are gone. Whole bone-in fried whiting demanded something from you. It came out of the grease with the skin taut and mahogany dark, the flesh sweet beneath a fine cornmeal crust, and eating it was an act of engagement. Fingers in, bones navigated, the small firm meat of the cheek worth working for. In black communities along the Atlantic seaboard, fried whiting was the fish, specific and unapologetic. Enslaved people from coastal West Africa were already practiced fishermen, and whiting, mild, affordable, easy to fry in quantity, fit that inheritance. By 1974, the Nation of Islam had contracted with a Peruvian distributor for 1 million pounds of whiting annually, sold door to door in black neighborhoods, and a 1975 issue of Muhammad Speaks listed it as a black household staple. The hot sauce that went on top was thin and sharp, cayenne cut with vinegar, nothing creamy. Fewer families fry whole fish at home now. The bones discourage people who didn't grow up learning to read them, and that particular reading is no longer taught. When the Great Migration sent black families north from Mississippi and Alabama, the fish fry came with them, but the fish changed. Catfish and porgy gave way to whatever the Midwest rivers offered, and what they offered was carp. Fried carp was the workhorse of the Midwest black community fish fry from the 1930s through the 60s, a coarse-fleshed freshwater fish that required brining overnight to draw out the mud taste. You soaked it in salted water or vinegar water, changed the brine once, dried the pieces, and dredged them heavy. The fry was louder than catfish, the skin darkening faster, the meat sweet underneath once you knew what you were doing. Perch and carp were the Great Lakes fish, pulled from rivers and lakes that Mississippi families had never seen before arriving in Chicago, Detroit, and Milwaukee. That generation is mostly gone, and the knowledge of how to brine carp into something worth eating left with them. She never bought it. That was the first thing you needed to understand. The real hot sauce at a black family fish fry came from the house. A mason jar of it lived in the back of the refrigerator or on the counter. A thin cayenne and vinegar liquid aged for weeks, sometimes months, the color of rust and the heat of a slow burn that settled in your chest. The tradition of making hot sauce for fish runs deep. Food historians note that folk medicine in southern black communities held cayenne helped protect against illness, a belief rooted in West African herbal tradition and reinforced through cholera epidemics of the 19th century. Whether or not anyone at the table thought about folk medicine, the effect was the same. Every fish fry had a sauce, and that sauce was a signature. You could taste whose table you were at, the ratio of cayenne to vinegar, the variety of pepper, how long you let it sit. That knowledge lived with specific women, and when they were gone, the recipe went with them. Before the first piece of fish hit the oil, your job was hush puppies, cornmeal batter with onion, salt, and buttermilk, dropped by a spoonful into the same cast iron the fish had been frying in all afternoon. The grease carried everything that came before it: the catfish, the perch, the trace of cayenne from the last batch. That was the point. Hush puppies fried in fish grease are entirely different from hush puppies fried in clean oil. They absorb the richness and smoke of what came before them and arrive at the plate dense with a flavor that has no other name. In southern black communities, fried perch alongside hush puppies came the way Sunday came alongside church. One implied the other. Perch was smaller and sweeter than catfish, quicker to fry, popular in the river communities of Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas, where families fished the same stretches of river their grandparents had fished. By the time the fish fry moved north with the Great Migration, perch stayed in some households and faded from others. The hush puppies made from leftover fish grease went with them. Nobody dressed the coleslaw the same way, and nobody agreed which version was right: creamy or vinegar, shredded fine or chunked rough, sugar in it or not. And that argument was as much a part of the fish fry as the fish itself. The hand-cut vinegar coleslaw was the older tradition: cabbage shredded by hand with a knife, not a machine, seasoned with cider vinegar, a pinch of salt, and nothing else. The creamy version crept in during the 1960s as store-bought mayonnaise became a pantry fixture and slowly overtook the original in most households. Both versions appeared on the fish fry table in separate bowls at opposite ends, and the bowl that ran out first told you everything about that family. The hand-cut vinegar version has nearly left home tables entirely, outrun by convenience and a generation that never learned to cut cabbage the old way. The potato salad was never the star, but it was always the first thing people checked. You could read the whole mood of a fish fry in that bowl, whether she'd used yellow mustard or the sweeter kind, whether the eggs were hard all the way through, whether the relish was sweet or dill. Church fish fry potato salad had its own grammar specific to congregation and kitchen, and the women who made it had been making it the same way for decades. There was no recipe card. The measurements existed in the hands. How much mustard until the color looked right, how much vinegar until the smell hit correctly, how long in the icebox until the flavors settled. In Black church fundraiser tradition from the 1940s onward, the fish fry plate came as a package: fish, potato salad, coleslaw, and white bread in a styrofoam container. The potato salad from that container, made by a woman in a church kitchen on a Saturday morning, tasted like nothing you can buy now. She smeared the mustard on with her fingers. Not a brush, not a spoon, her fingers pressing yellow mustard directly onto the raw catfish fillet, both sides, before the cornmeal ever touched the fish. Yellow mustard was the binder. It made the cornmeal crust adhere in a way that egg wash or plain water couldn't match, giving the finished fish a crust that snapped when you broke it and held firm to the flesh. The technique was common in Southern Black kitchens. Anyone from those households recognized it immediately, but no one outside them did. It was never published. You learned it by standing next to her and watching, and if you asked why, she said that's just how it's done. In the 1950s and 60s, as cotton farmers across the Mississippi Delta flooded their fields to raise catfish and made farm-raised fish affordable to Black households across the region, the mustard technique spread from kitchen to kitchen, passed hand to hand, invisible to anyone who hadn't been in the right room. But years before fried fish and spaghetti became the controversy of soul food, internet culture, it was simply what showed up on the plate at the church fundraiser: a scoop of meatless tomato spaghetti pressed against a piece of fried catfish in the same styrofoam container, both soaking into white bread laid underneath. The combination took root in the Mississippi Delta and followed the Great Migration north to Chicago, Detroit, and Milwaukee, where Black families from the Deep South brought the pairing as a fact of life. By the late 1920s, spaghetti recipes were already appearing regularly in African American cookbooks, and in time it made the jump from entree to side dish, paired with fried fish the way you'd pair coleslaw. Food historian Adrian Miller traced the specific pairing to Black church fundraisers in the Midwest and first tasted it at Betty's Place in Indianola, Mississippi, near the birthplace of B.B. King, where it came with deep-fried buffalo fish ribs instead of catfish fillet. That particular church hall version, meatless sauce and all, has nearly left the table. Along the Gulf Coast, from the Florida Panhandle through Alabama and Mississippi, fried mullet was the fish fry fish the rest of the country never talked about. Mullet ran thick in those coastal waters, caught in cast nets thrown from the shore, and in Black communities along that coastline, it was the centerpiece of the summer fish fry, split, seasoned with salt and cayenne, dredged in cornmeal and fried whole or in thick steaks. Mullet has an oily flesh and a stronger flavor than catfish or whiting, and those who didn't grow up with it found it challenging. Those who did couldn't imagine the fish fry table without it. Mullet festivals still exist in coastal Florida, but the tradition of the home mullet fry, fish from the net to the kitchen in hours, fried in a cast iron set up outdoors over a wood fire, has gone quiet. The men and women who knew that fish the way you know a neighbor are mostly gone, and with them went the instinct for which cut you fried, which you smoked, and which you set aside. The pound cake arrived in a plastic bag, tied at the top with a twist of foil, and it sat at the end of the table beside the styrofoam containers like an afterthought. But it was never an afterthought. At Black church fish fry fundraisers from the 1940s through the 70s, pound cake was the dessert, dense, buttery, tight crumbed, made by a woman who started it hours before anyone else arrived and who never wrote down the amounts. The fish fry plate came as a package: fish, potato salad or spaghetti, coleslaw, white bread, and a slice of pound cake was the seal on the deal, the thing that told you this was a real fundraiser put on by real women who knew what they were doing. Some churches had 2 or 3 women competing for the pound cake slot, each convinced her version was definitive. The woman who got it right never needed to say so. Her empty pan said it for her. In the 1920s and 30s, the rent party was exactly what it sounded like. You needed money for rent, you charged a small admission at the door, cooked everything you could afford in quantity, and let the neighborhood in. Fried fish was the anchor of the urban northern version, cheap in quantity, fast to cook in batches, aromatic enough to draw people up the stairs from the street. The fish fry rent party migrated north with the Great Migration, carried from the rural South's Saturday night fish traditions into cramped apartments on Chicago's South Side and in Harlem and Detroit's Paradise Valley. By the late 1960s, the formalized church fundraiser had largely replaced the informal rent party in most communities. The styrofoam container replaced the paper plate. The folding table outside the church replaced the kitchen window. The tradition survived, but the raw necessity that gave it its original character, that particular combination of cooking and survival, did not. If Catfish was the fish fry's headliner, Crappie was the secret opening act. Small, paper thin, fried whole, with the bones still in and eaten like a chip, 2 or 3 bites per fish, the skin so crisp it shattered when you bit through. Crappie ran in the rivers and lakes of the Deep South in quantities that made them nearly free. You could pull 30 off a cane pole on a summer afternoon in Mississippi without moving from your spot. And in Black communities along those waterways, a good crappie catch meant a fish fry that night. You seasoned them with salt and pepper and dropped them whole into the oil. And because they were thin, they fried in minutes, coming out so crispy you ate the tail like a cracker. Nobody serves whole fried crappie at a restaurant. That knowledge, the cane pole, the quick fry, the way you held the fish by the head and pulled the spine clean, lived in river communities that barely exist anymore. There was a man on the corner. In Black neighborhoods, from Washington, D.C. to Chicago to Los Angeles, from the mid-1960s onward, that man was often selling fried whiting from a truck or a folding stand. And he was almost certainly a member of the Nation of Islam. The NOI recognized what the rest of the food world hadn't. Fried whiting in Black communities was not just a meal, it was a weekly ritual, and it could be sold at a profit to anyone walking by. By 1974, the organization had contracted with a Peruvian distributor for 1 million pounds of whiting annually, sold door to door and from street stands across the country. The theology drove part of it. Catfish was considered haram, a bottom feeder, and whiting was the clean alternative. But the economics drove the rest. By the late 1970s, those street corner whiting stands were fixtures in Black neighborhoods. By the mid-1980s, most of them were gone. Spot fish. If you grew up outside the Chesapeake Bay corridor, outside the Black communities of Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and the Virginia coastline, you probably never heard of it. If you grew up inside them, you can smell the fry from here. The Atlantic spot is a small, flat-bodied fish that runs the Chesapeake in dense schools each fall, and in Black households along the bay, The spot fry was an autumn institution. You scaled them yourself, seasoned them with salt and cayenne, dredged them in cornmeal, and fried them whole, head and tail on, the flesh sweet and delicate, eaten off the bone with your fingers. The fall spot run still happens, but the tradition of the home spot fry, the whole neighborhood knowing when someone had a cast net, neighbors arriving with empty plates, has nearly left those streets. The pier where your grandmother's neighbor stood with that net is a parking lot now. The white bread was not a side dish. Let that be understood. The slice placed flat under the fried fish was not there to be eaten alongside it. It was there to do a job. The bread absorbed the hot grease as it ran off the fish, softening as it soaked, becoming something neither bread nor sauce, but a warm, grease-saturated square that a certain generation considered the best part of the plate. Kids at the fish fry understood this before they understood anything about cooking. You watched the grown-ups, you saw them lift the fish and look at what was underneath, and you knew. If someone got to the table late and found the bread already claimed, there was a moment, brief, dignified, impossible to misread, of genuine grief. Some families served extra slices for this purpose. Others treated the grease bread as a privilege that went to whoever sat down first, which was its own lesson in why you did not arrive late to the fish fry. That slice is gone from the table now, replaced by a napkin that does the job badly and keeps none of the reward. Monday morning had a smell too, not the festive roar of the fish fry, but something quieter and more honest. The smell of yesterday's fried fish crumbled into a cast iron skillet with onions and potatoes left over from the weekend, reborn into something the family called hash. Fish hash was the nothing wasted kitchen at its most practical. You picked the flesh away from the bones, worked it into a skillet with whatever was on hand, and what came out was in some ways richer than the original fry. The seasoning had settled deeper overnight. The fish hit the hot cast iron with the onions and gave off a smell that meant Monday was going to be all right. There was no recipe. There couldn't be. It depended entirely on what was left. When the fish fry stopped being a weekly event, the hash that followed it stopped too, and both disappeared at the same moment, a tradition folding into itself and going quiet. And if the hash was what you made when the fish fry was over, court bouillon was what you made when you had the whole afternoon and wanted to show what catfish could really do. Catfish, court bouillon, a Creole-inflected dish that took root in Gulf Coast black households from Louisiana through Alabama, was a different register from the fry entirely. A roux made dark and nutty, onions and bell pepper softened into it, tomatoes and broth added, and whole catfish steaks laid in to simmer low until the flesh was tender and the sauce had reduced to something brick red and complex. The technique came from the Creole kitchen traditions of Louisiana, where court bouillon described a reduced aromatic fish broth, and it traveled east with the families who carried it. Served over rice with nothing else needed, it was a Sunday afternoon dish that required patience the weekday fish fry couldn't afford. That patience and the knowledge of when the roux was ready lived in specific hands. Deep-fried buffalo fish ribs were not a dish most people knew by name, but if you ordered fish at Betty's Place in Indianola, Mississippi, in the heart of Delta soul food country, you might get them instead of catfish fillet and count yourself lucky. Buffalo fish is a large, thick-boned freshwater species from the Mississippi River Basin, and the ribcage section, deep-fried, produces something closer to a rib than a fillet, dense, meaty, with a richness that farm-raised catfish doesn't approach, the bones large enough to hold in two hands and pull the flesh from directly. In the Delta in the 1950s and 60s, buffalo was what the river gave you before catfish. Farming changed what was available and affordable. It was the fish of the juke joint and the Saturday night gathering, the cast iron over a wood fire by the water. You won't find it in a restaurant now. You won't find it almost anywhere. Black drum fell through the cracks of culinary history, not famous enough to survive the restaurant era, just present and abundant along the Gulf Coast until the communities that fried it moved on. Black families from coastal Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Carolinas pulled drum from the surf and inlets in cast nets alongside mullet, seasoned it the same way, salt, cayenne, cornmeal, and fried it in the same cast iron. Drum has a firm, mildly sweet flesh that holds up to frying better than most Gulf fish, and the larger specimens, called redfish, once they reached size, were a special occasion catch. By the 1980s, redfish had become fashionable in upscale Louisiana cooking, blackened and served in expensive restaurants, effectively priced and marketed away from the communities that had been eating it quietly for generations. The home drum fry, without the blackening, without the fanfare, went quiet when those kitchens did. Before the fish fry was the fish fry, there was the stew. In the Depression years and the lean decades before catfish farming made whole fillets affordable, the pot was how you fed the most people for the least. A whole catfish cut into sections and simmered low with tomatoes, potatoes, corn, and onions from the garden, the broth thickening as the fish gave up its fat to the liquid. Catfish stew stretched a single river catch into something that fed 8 without apology. Some households seasoned it with cayenne and a bay leaf. Others added a splash of vinegar at the end to cut the richness. By the time the cast iron fish fry became the centerpiece of community cooking in the 1960s, the stew had stepped back, grown quiet, receded into the memory of older women who remembered when frying in quantity was not yet affordable. Nobody fished for gar by accident. Gar was a decision, a long prehistoric-looking river fish with armor-plated scales that required a hatchet or 10 snips to open. And even then, the flesh came off in chunks that needed further trimming. In the bayous and backwater sloughs of Louisiana, Mississippi, and East Texas, gar was the fish the serious river people knew and the casual ones left alone. The preparation was its own form of expertise. You scored the skinned meat with a knife, seasoned it deep, dredged it twice, and fried it in oil hot enough to seal the crust before the moisture escaped, because gar flesh holds water differently from catfish. What came out was firm, almost meaty, the crust thick and savory, the flavor rich in a way that spoke of the river bottom it came from. That knowledge lives with almost no one now. The Saturday night fish fry didn't start as a party. It started on the plantation in the brief stretch of afternoon after the work slowed, when men and women went to the nearest water with whatever they could fish with and fried what they caught communally. One of the few times all week when they controlled what they ate and who they ate it with. After emancipation, it became a weekly institution, traveling with every migration north and west, transforming from a plantation clearing to a Harlem kitchen, to a church parking lot, to a backyard in Detroit without losing its essential character. The gathering around the heat of the oil, the smell that pulled people in from the street, the noise of everyone talking while the fish fried in the cast iron. Whole neighborhoods organized around that smell. It didn't disappear all at once. It thinned over decades as those neighborhoods changed, as the cast irons went into storage, as the generations who carried the knowledge grew old and passed without teaching it forward. What remains is the memory of the gathering. The gathering itself is mostly gone. Frying in cast iron instead of nonstick pans was the only option in traditional African American kitchens, and science confirms this was superior choice. Cast iron retains heat exceptionally well, maintaining consistent oil temperature even when cold food is added, preventing greasy results from temperature drops. Heavy pans distribute heat evenly, eliminating hot spots that burn some pieces while undercooking others. Scientists documented that properly seasoned cast iron develops natural non-stick surface rivaling synthetic coatings without chemical concerns. The iron leaches small amounts of dietary iron into food, providing nutritional benefits modern cookware cannot offer. These pans pass through generations, gaining better seasoning with each use. What seemed stubborn tradition was wisdom about heat management. Preheating low and slow was essential wisdom that separated experienced cooks from beginners in Black kitchens of the 1950s. Grandmothers never rushed their cast iron, understanding that heavy pans needed time to heat evenly across their entire surface. A skillet placed over high flame developed hot spots that burned food in patches. Instead, the pan went over low heat for 15 minutes, the iron gradually absorbing warmth until every inch reached the same temperature. Only then would the flame increase. Children learned patience watching this process. The evenly heated surface meant chicken browned uniformly, cornbread developed consistent crust, and nothing stuck. This technique protected the seasoning too, preventing thermal shock that could damage the finish. The slow approach extended the pan's life across generations. Salting meat hours before frying was a practice modern cooks abandoned in favor of last-minute seasoning. Yet, African American kitchens maintained this tradition with delicious results. The technique involved generously salting chicken or fish and allowing it to rest for several hours or overnight before cooking. Salt draws moisture to the surface initially, but over time dissolves and is reabsorbed, carrying flavor deep into meat while restructuring proteins for better texture. Scientists call this dry brining, and research confirms it produces juicier, more flavorful results than immediate cooking. The method seasons meat throughout rather than just on surface, eliminating bland bites. Grandmothers knew good fried chicken required overnight preparation, and patience produced legendary results. The splatter shield with pot lids was practical protection Black grandmothers used against hot grease burns while monitoring their frying food. A lid held at an angle over the skillet deflected spitting oil away from hands and arms while allowing steam to escape and letting cooks watch browning progress. This technique required skill. Holding the lid too close trapped steam and made food soggy, while holding it too far offered little protection. Grandmothers developed steady hands from years of practice, able to flip chicken one-handed while the other held the shield. Children were warned repeatedly about grease burns and taught this defensive technique before being allowed near the stove. The pot lid method also caught grease vapor, keeping kitchen walls cleaner. Every kitchen already had one. Preheating low and slow was essential wisdom that separated experienced cooks from beginners in Black kitchens of the 1950s. Grandmothers never rushed their cast iron, understanding that heavy pans needed time to heat evenly across their entire surface. A skillet placed over high flame developed hot spots that burned food in patches. Instead, the pan went over low heat for 15 minutes, the iron gradually absorbing warmth until every inch reached the same temperature. Only then would the flame increase. Children learned patience watching this process. The evenly heated surface meant chicken browned uniformly, cornbread developed consistent crust, and nothing stuck. This technique protected the seasoning too, preventing thermal shock that could damage the finish. The slow approach extended the pan's life across generations. Double frying for extra crispy results was a technique Black grandmothers used when nothing less than perfection would do. The first fry cooked food through at moderate temperature, sealing moisture and setting the crust. Then pieces rested on wire racks while oil heated higher. The second fry lasted only minutes, but transformed the exterior into something shatteringly crisp while the inside stayed tender. This method worked especially well for chicken and fish destined for Sunday dinner tables. The resting period allowed steam to escape, preventing sogginess that plagued single fry methods. Grandmothers timed both stages precisely, knowing seconds mattered. The extra effort showed in every bite, the crust crackling loudly between teeth. Children fought over the crispiest pieces, understanding this food represented extra love. Breakfast preparation efficiency meant one skillet could cook an entire morning meal in sequence without washing between items. Black mothers in the 1960s feeding families before work and school needed speed and simplicity. The cast iron skillet started with bacon, is rendered fat remaining in the pan to fry eggs, which were followed by potatoes crisped in the remaining grease. Nothing was wasted. Nothing required scrubbing between steps. The flavors built upon each other. Bacon-scented eggs, pork-flavored potatoes. Children ate plates assembled from this single-pan production while mothers worked efficiently at the stove. The skillet was wiped with a cloth between uses, never washed with soap that would strip seasoning. This system fed families quickly on busy mornings when time was precious. Flour dredging in paper bags was the mess-free technique Black grandmothers perfected for coating chicken, fish, and pork chops. Seasoned flour went into a large brown paper bag along with pieces of meat. The bag was folded closed, then shaken vigorously until every piece wore an even coat. Children often helped with the shaking, turning kitchen work into something playful. The paper absorbed excess moisture while distributing flour evenly without creating countertop disaster. When finished, the bag went straight into trash, leaving nothing to wash. The technique worked because confined space and agitation coated every surface. Some grandmothers added secret spice blends to the flour, creating proprietary mixtures that defined their signature fried foods. The paper bag method was practical genius that delivered perfectly coated results. Resting meat at room temperature before frying was considered dangerous by modern standards, yet African American cooks practiced it for generations with remarkable results. Pulling chicken from the refrigerator 30 minutes before frying allowed protein to temper, ensuring even cooking throughout. Cold meat dropped into hot oil causes temperature shock, leading to uneven cooking where outside burns while inside stays underdone. Scientists acknowledge brief room temperature resting produces superior texture and doneness. The technique also prevented excessive oil splatter since warmer meat released less moisture violently upon contact with hot fat. Grandmothers understood rushing the process never yielded best results, and their patience created fried foods with perfect interiors. Seasoning the skillet with bacon grease was ritual passed from mother to daughter in Black kitchens throughout the 1950s South. After every use, grandmothers wiped their cast iron clean with a cloth, never soap, then rubbed warm bacon grease across the surface while the pan still held heat. This created a natural coating that deepened with every meal. The grease filled tiny pores in the iron, preventing rust and creating a glossy finish that announced years of careful tending. Children watched closely, understanding that a well-seasoned skillet was family treasure. Some pans had been seasoned for decades, their surfaces smoother than any modern coating. The grease added subtle depth to everything cooked afterward, meaning eggs carried traces of yesterday's breakfast. This technique transformed ordinary iron into heirloom vessels. Using lard instead of vegetable oil was standard in African American kitchens until industrial marketing convinced generations that processed oils were healthier. Pure rendered pork fat created fried foods with unmatched flavor and impossibly crisp textures vegetable oils cannot replicate. Lard has a higher smoke point than many vegetable oils, remaining stable at frying temperatures without breaking down into harmful compounds. Scientists revisited the demonization of animal fats, finding lard contains less saturated fat than butter and no artificial trans fats. African American grandmothers rendered their own lard from pork fat, ensuring purity commercial products cannot match. What was dismissed as backward cooking has been vindicated by nutritional science, proving traditional wisdom was ahead of its time. Buttermilk soaking before frying was the tenderizing secret that made Black grandmothers' fried chicken legendary across the South. Chicken pieces went into bowls of tangy buttermilk for hours or overnight, the acid working slowly to break down tough fibers while adding subtle flavor. The buttermilk also helped flour coating adhere better, creating thicker crust that stayed put during frying. Some grandmothers added hot sauce or garlic to their buttermilk baths. Children would peer into refrigerators at bowls of soaking chicken, anticipating the meal to come. When soaked pieces met seasoned flour, the wet surface grabbed coating eagerly. The science was simple. Acid tenderizes protein, but results seemed like magic. This patient technique separated Sunday dinner chicken from everyday meals. Letting battered foods rest before frying seemed counterintuitive when crispy results were desired. Yet, African American cooks knew this pause produced superior texture. After coating chicken or fish in flour, pieces were set aside for 10 to 15 minutes before entering hot oil. This resting period allowed flour to hydrate and form paste-like coating, adhering better during frying and developing more substantial crunch. Scientists explain hydrated flour creates stronger gluten networks resisting separation during cooking and crisping more evenly. The technique allowed excess coating to settle, preventing clumps frying unevenly or falling into oil. Grandmothers prepared large batches, and natural wait time created this beneficial rest. What seemed inefficiency was technique refined through generations. The grease-saving ritual was sacred practice in Black kitchens where nothing went to waste. After frying, grandmothers let grease cool slightly, then strained it through cheesecloth into ceramic crocks kept beside the stove. This collected grease contained concentrated flavor from countless meals, bacon, chicken, fish, all mingling into liquid gold. The containers were never washed, only replenished, creating layers of seasoning that deepened over months. When cooking began, a spoonful of saved grease went into the skillet first, adding depth that fresh oil could never provide. Children understood this murky fat represented economy and flavor combined. The ritual continued daily without fanfare, simply part of kitchen rhythm. Modern cooks might cringe, but this technique delivered taste that made even simple vegetables memorable. Double dipping in seasoned flour was a technique African American cooks mastered generations before culinary schools taught coating methods. The process involved dredging meat in seasoned flour, dipping it into buttermilk, and coating it again before frying. This created multiple layers, sealing in moisture while building shatteringly crisp exterior. Scientists confirm the double layer creates a barrier slowing moisture loss, keeping interior tender while the outside achieves maximum crunch. Grandmothers knew this instinctively, passing the method down without laboratory validation. The technique was popular for fried chicken and catfish, where extra coating absorbed seasonings and developed deeper flavor. Modern chefs rediscovered what Black kitchens never forgot: patience produces results no shortcut can match. The cold pan stock for chicken defied conventional wisdom, but delivered perfect results every time. Black grandmothers placed seasoned chicken pieces into a cold cast iron skillet with solid shortening, then turned on the heat. As the pan warmed slowly, the fat rendered gradually, allowing the coating to set before the fierce sizzle began. This prevented flour from falling off and ensured the crust adhered perfectly. The chicken fried itself as temperature climbed, developing deep golden color without burning. Kitchens filled with gentle popping that grew louder as heat intensified. Children learned to judge doneness by ear as much as sight. This method required trust and patience with the slow build, but it produced crispier, more evenly cooked chicken than any hot-start method could achieve. These kitchens are gone. If one of these dishes fed you once, drop its name below. Let it be remembered.